A millionaire pays a woman to have his child, but her demands will leave you stunned. James Carter leaned back in his plush leather chair, gazing out of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The city skyline stretched out before him, a sprawling testament to his success. Everything in James's life had been meticulously planned, calculated, and executed. A self-made millionaire, he had built his empire from the ground up. Yet, despite his wealth and power, there was one thing that had eluded him: legacy. The thought gnawed at him as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. His reflection in the window stared back, a man in his late 30s, sharp-featured and composed, yet haunted by an emptiness he couldn't quite name. He had tried relationships, several in fact, but none had led to the family he secretly longed for. James wasn't the type to admit weakness, not even to himself, but this yearning had grown louder with each passing year. That's when the idea struck him. If relationships were too complicated, why not approach the matter with the same precision he applied to business? A contract, clear terms, no emotions involved. A surrogate. It was simple, logical, just like everything in his life. James leaned forward, his fingers drumming against the sleek desk as he picked up the folder his assistant had placed there earlier. Inside was a profile, a candidate who met every criterion. Anna Collins. 34 years old, educated, healthy, and fiercely independent. She wasn't looking for charity or a handout, she was looking for an opportunity that James could respect. The meeting was set for the following day, and as James reviewed the details, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Anticipation? He dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. This was business, nothing more. The next afternoon, Anna stepped into the conference room of Carter Enterprises, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She wore a modest yet elegant dress, her hair pulled back neatly, exuding a quiet confidence that immediately caught James's attention. She wasn't intimidated by the grandeur of her surroundings or the man seated at the head of the table. If anything, she seemed unfazed. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending a hand. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Miss Collins," James replied, shaking her hand briefly. "Please, have a seat." Anna sat down, folding her hands in her lap as she regarded him with a level gaze. James admired her composure. Most people in her position would have been fidgeting or overly eager to please. She, however, seemed to understand the weight of the moment without being overwhelmed by it. "I'll get straight to the point," James began, leaning forward slightly. "You've seen the proposal. I want to be clear that this arrangement is strictly professional. You will be compensated generously, and all your expenses will be covered. In return, I expect complete discretion and adherence to the terms outlined in the contract." Anna nodded, but there was no eagerness in her expression, no immediate acceptance. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to gauge the man behind the offer. "I've read the contract," she said after a moment. "And while I understand the terms, there are a few things I'd like to discuss." James raised an eyebrow. This wasn't the response he had anticipated. Most people would have jumped at the chance, especially considering the sum involved. But Anna was different. He could see it in the way she carried herself, the calm yet deliberate way she spoke. "Go on," he said, gesturing for her to continue. Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between them. "Before we proceed, I want to be clear about my own terms. This isn't just about money for me. If I'm going to bring a child into this world, I need to ensure that they'll have more than just financial security. I need to know that they'll have stability, integrity, and a chance to make a difference." James's interest was piqued, though he kept his expression neutral. "What exactly are you proposing?" Anna opened the folder, revealing a document she had prepared. "In addition to the financial compensation, I want to guarantee that a portion of the trust fund you're setting up for the child will go toward philanthropic efforts. Education initiatives, healthcare programs, things that will benefit more than just one person." James blinked, taken aback. Of all the demands he had anticipated, this was not one of them. "You're asking me to invest in charities?" "I'm asking you to invest in your child's future by teaching them the value of giving back," Anna corrected. If this is about legacy, as I assume it is, then it should be about more than just wealth. For a moment, James was silent, studying her. She wasn't trying to manipulate him or take advantage of his wealth. Her proposal was genuine, rooted in values he hadn't expected to encounter in a negotiation like this. "That's unconventional," he said finally, "but not entirely unreasonable. Is that all?" Anna hesitated, and for the first time, James saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice quieter now. "I want to be involved in the child's life. Not as a parent, necessarily, but as someone they can turn to. I don't believe in bringing a life into this world only to walk away from it completely." James's jaw tightened. This was the part he had hoped to avoid. He had envisioned a clean break, no complications, no entanglements. But Anna's words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. "You understand that this complicates things," he said, his tone measured. "I do," Anna replied. "But I believe it's the right thing to do. And if this arrangement is going to work, I need to know that we're on the same page." James leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't how he had expected the conversation to go, but something about Anna's conviction made him pause. She wasn't like anyone he had dealt with before. She wasn't here for the money or the prestige. She was here because she believed in something bigger than herself. For the first time in a long while, James felt uncertain. And he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Anna, trying to unravel her motivations. She sat there, calm yet resolute, her hands folded neatly on the table as if she had just made the most reasonable request in the world. It was a stark contrast to the controlled chaos in his mind. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Miss Collins," he began, his voice measured, "you must understand why your second condition is problematic." "I understand," Anna replied without hesitation. "But I believe it's non-negotiable." James raised an eyebrow. Few people dared to challenge him, let alone tell him what was non-negotiable. Yet, here was this woman, unfazed by his wealth and authority, drawing her own lines in the sand. He had to admit, it was impressive. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He hated this feeling, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. It wasn't who he was. And yet, as much as he wanted to dismiss Anna's demands as inconvenient or unnecessary, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. This wasn't just about him. It was about the life they were bringing into the world. A life that deserved more than money could provide. The next morning, James made his decision. Anna stood in the same conference room where they'd first met, her posture as poised as ever. The morning light streaming through the windows cast a warm glow over her face, but her expression remained unreadable. Across the table, James sat with the revised contract in hand, his demeanor cool and collected. "I've reviewed your terms," he said, his voice steady. "And I've decided to move forward." Anna's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise breaking through her composure. "You've agreed to everything?" James nodded, sliding the signed contract across the table. "Every clause, including your involvement in the child's life." For a moment, Anna said nothing, her eyes scanning the document. When she finally looked up, there was a softness in her expression that James hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she said simply. But there was weight in those two words, an unspoken acknowledgement of what this decision meant. James leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're not what I expected, Anna." She smiled faintly, closing the folder and placing it in her bag. "I've heard that before." "I mean it," he pressed. "Most people would have taken the money and walked away. But you've turned this into something else entirely." Anna met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I don't believe in doing things halfway, Mr. Carter. If I'm going to bring a child into this world, I need to know that I've done everything in my power to give them the best possible start." James nodded slowly, his respect for her growing with every word. She wasn't just a surrogate, she was a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time, he found himself wondering what it would be like to share this journey with her. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation. James spared no expense, ensuring Anna had access to the best doctors, nutritionists, and therapists money could buy. He set up a trust fund for the child as outlined in the contract and began researching philanthropic initiatives that aligned with Anna's vision. At first, it felt transactional, another box to check off his to-do list. But as time went on, something began to shift. Their interactions, initially formal and businesslike, became more frequent and personal. Anna would send him updates after her doctor's appointments, and James found himself looking forward to them in a way he hadn't anticipated. She would mention small, seemingly insignificant details, the way she craved oranges one week or how the baby's heartbeat sounded during the ultrasound, and he realized he cared more than he thought he would. One evening, Anna invited James to join her for a prenatal class. He hesitated at first, unsure of how to navigate the unfamiliar territory. But her invitation had been genuine, and he found himself agreeing. The class was held in a cozy studio, filled with other expectant parents and their partners. James felt out of place at first, his tailored suit standing in stark contrast to the casual attire of everyone else. But Anna's presence grounded him. She greeted him with a warm smile, handing him a yoga mat as though it were the most natural thing in the world. As the instructor guided them through breathing exercises and relaxation techniques, James couldn't help but steal glances at Anna. She was radiant, her hands resting protectively over her growing belly. For the first time, the reality of what they were doing began to sink in. This wasn't just an abstract concept or a theoretical plan. This was real. The life they had created together was real. After the class, as they walked to their cars, Anna turned to him. "You did well in there," she said with a hint of teasing. "Not bad for a first-timer." James chuckled, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I'm not sure I'll be winning any awards for my breathing techniques, but thank you." Anna laughed, the sound light and genuine. It was a moment of levity, a brief respite from the weight of their arrangement. And in that moment, James realized something startling. He didn't feel like he was fulfilling a contract. He felt like he was building something meaningful. But not everything was seamless. As the months passed, James found himself grappling with unexpected challenges. His board of directors questioned his focus, hinting that his newfound priorities were distracting him from his responsibilities. Friends and acquaintances, though polite to his face, whispered behind his back about his decision to have a child out of wedlock. James brushed off their comments, but their disapproval lingered in the back of his mind. He had always cared about perception, about maintaining the image of control and success. Yet, for the first time, he found himself questioning whether their opinions mattered at all. Anna faced her own challenges. Though she remained steadfast in her commitment to the arrangement, she couldn't escape the judgment of those around her. Old friends distanced themselves, unable to understand her decision. Strangers made assumptions, their questions veiled in condescension. But Anna bore it all with quiet grace, her resolve unwavering. It was during one of their weekly meetings that Anna brought up the subject. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes searching. James looked up from the report he had been skimming, caught off guard. "Regret what?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "The arrangement. The scrutiny that comes with it." He considered her question carefully. "It's not what I expected," he admitted. "But regret? If anything, it's made me realize what's actually important." Anna smiled, her expression soft. "That's good to hear." The weeks passed, and the due date loomed closer. James found himself spending more time thinking about the child, what they would look like, the kind of life they would have, and the type of father he wanted to be. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't accustomed to. For so long, his life had been defined by deals, acquisitions, and measurable successes. But this was different. This was uncharted territory. One evening, as James was going over some paperwork in his study, his phone buzzed. It was Anna. "James," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I need to talk to you. Can you come by?" James set the papers aside, his focus immediately shifting. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Yes," Anna replied, though there was a pause before she continued. I think it's time we talked about what happens after the baby is born." 15 minutes later, James arrived at Anna's apartment. It was modest but warm, a reflection of her practical yet thoughtful nature. She greeted him at the door, her expression calm but serious. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I made tea." James followed her to the living room, where a steaming pot sat on the coffee table. He took a seat, noticing a stack of baby books on the corner of the couch. He couldn't help but smile slightly. "Doing your homework?" Anna glanced at the books and chuckled softly. "I like to be prepared." He nodded, sensing there was more on her mind. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Anna poured 2 cups of tea before sitting across from him. She took a moment, gathering her thoughts, before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens after the baby is born," she began. "How we're going to handle things." James sipped his tea, waiting for her to continue. "I know the contract outlines everything in detail," Anna said, her tone measured. "But contracts don't account for emotions, or how complicated things can get once there's an actual child involved." James set his cup down, leaning forward slightly. "Go on." Anna met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I want us to have a plan that goes beyond what's on paper. A plan for how we're going to communicate, how we're going to handle decisions about the baby, and how we're going to make this work as a team." The team. The word hung in the air, its significance not lost on James. He had spent his entire life working with teams, delegating tasks, and leading initiatives. But this wasn't a business venture. This was something far more personal. "I agree," he said finally. "We need to be on the same page." Anna relaxed slightly, though her expression remained thoughtful. "I know this isn't what you envisioned when you started all of this. But I think we've both grown since then. And I think we owe it to the child to approach this as partners." James nodded slowly. "You're right. This isn't what I envisioned. But maybe that's a good thing." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how they would handle shared decisions, how they would introduce Anna's involvement to the child, and how they would navigate any challenges that arose. It was a conversation neither of them had anticipated, but it was one they both needed. As James left Anna's apartment that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. They had started as strangers, bound by a contract. But now, they were something more. Not quite friends, not quite partners, but something in between. And for the first time, James felt a glimmer of hope that this arrangement might actually work. A few weeks later, Anna called James in the middle of the night. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I'm heading to the hospital." James was out the door in minutes, his heart pounding as he navigated the empty streets. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Anna was already in a private room, her face flushed but composed. "You didn't have to come so quickly," she said with a faint smile as he entered. James shook his head. "Of course I did." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Doctors and nurses moved in and out of the room, their voices calm but efficient. James stayed by Anna's side, his presence steady even as his nerves threatened to get the better of him. He had faced high-stakes negotiations and billion-dollar deals, but nothing had prepared him for this. As the sun rose, casting a golden light over the city, the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. James felt his breath catch as he looked down at the tiny, wriggling life in the doctor's hands. His child. Their child. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, handing the baby to Anna. Anna held her daughter close, her eyes glistening with tears. She looked up at James, her smile soft but radiant. "She's perfect." James nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched his daughter's tiny fingers. They curled around his finger instinctively, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. This wasn't about legacy or contracts or proving something to himself. This was about her, their daughter. And for the first time in his life, James felt truly humbled. The days that followed were a whirlwind of firsts. First feedings, first sleepless nights, first moments of wonder and awe. James threw himself into fatherhood with a determination that surprised even him. He had never imagined himself as the hands-on type, but he found joy in the smallest moments, rocking his daughter to sleep, watching her tiny chest rise and fall as she breathed, and marveling at the way she seemed to change every day. Anna, true to her word, was present but not intrusive. She visited often, her presence calm and reassuring. She and James developed a rhythm, a delicate balance between their roles that felt surprisingly natural. But as much as they worked together, there were still challenges. James's life, once carefully controlled and predictable, was now filled with uncertainty. He struggled to balance his responsibilities as a father with his role as the head of his company. Late nights at the office became rare, replaced by late nights at home with his daughter. And while he wouldn't have traded it for anything, the adjustment wasn't easy. One evening, as James sat in the nursery, watching his daughter sleep, Anna entered the room quietly. She leaned against the doorframe, her expression soft. "You're doing well," she said after a moment. James glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Coming from you, that means a lot." Anna chuckled softly, stepping into the room. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. "She's lucky to have you, James." For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft rhythm of the baby's breathing. And in that silence, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a shared commitment to the life they had brought into the world. As the weeks turned into months, James settled into his new life as a father. The initial chaos began to subside, replaced by a tentative rhythm that he and Anna had worked hard to establish. Despite the challenges, they found ways to support each other. James handled the practicalities with the precision of a businessman, while Anna provided the emotional grounding that neither of them had realized they needed. Their daughter, whom they named Emma, became the center of their world. Every milestone, her first smile, her first laugh, felt like a triumph. James found himself marveling at how much joy such a small person could bring into his life. He had never thought of himself as sentimental, but Emma had a way of softening even his sharpest edges. Anna's involvement, too, became a source of strength rather than a complication. True to her word, she respected the boundaries they had agreed upon, yet her presence was invaluable. She offered advice when James was unsure, reassured him when he doubted himself, and reminded him that parenting wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up. One evening, as they sat in James's living room, Anna cradling a sleepy Emma in her arms, James found himself reflecting on how far they had come. "Do you ever think about how all of this started?" he asked, his tone thoughtful. Anna glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You mean the contract? The negotiations? The fact that we approached this like a business deal?" James chuckled softly. "Exactly. It feels so far removed from where we are now." Anna nodded, her gaze dropping to Emma's peaceful face. "It does. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it means we've grown." James leaned back, his expression contemplative. "I didn't expect any of this. Not the challenges, not the changes, not you." Anna raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Is that your way of saying you're glad I'm here?" He smirked, shaking his head. "You're impossible." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. It was a moment of levity, a reminder of how much their dynamic had evolved. They weren't just co-parents, they were partners in the truest sense of the word. But as harmonious as things had become, life was far from perfect. The world outside their little bubble continued to impose its pressures. For James, the biggest challenge came in the form of his company. One morning, during a board meeting, one of his senior executives brought up a concern. "James," the man began, his tone measured but firm, "while we all respect your dedication to your personal life, there's been some unease among the team about your availability." James raised an eyebrow, his expression hardening. "Unease?" The man hesitated before continuing. "You've been delegating more responsibilities lately, and while we understand your priorities have shifted, there's a sense that the company isn't your top focus anymore." James's jaw tightened. He had expected some pushback, but hearing it stated so plainly was jarring. For years, Carter Enterprises had been his life's work, the culmination of everything he had sacrificed and fought for. But now, with Emma in his life, his priorities had shifted in ways he couldn't ignore. "I'm still fully committed to this company," he said, his tone firm. "But if anyone has concerns about my leadership, I suggest they come to me directly." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. James knew he had made his point, but the encounter left him unsettled. Balancing his role as a father with his responsibilities as a CEO was proving to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Anna, too, faced her own struggles. Though she and James had developed a strong partnership, the outside world wasn't always as understanding. Friends and acquaintances questioned her decision to remain involved in Emma's life, often framing it as a lack of independence. "Don't you think it's time to move on?" one friend asked during a coffee outing. "You're not even the child's mother in the traditional sense. Why tie yourself to this arrangement?" Anna bristled at the comment but kept her tone calm. "Because it's the right thing to do. Emma deserves stability, and I'm committed to being part of her life." The friend frowned, clearly unconvinced. "But isn't it hard? Being so involved, but not in the way most people would expect." Anna smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. Hard doesn't mean wrong. Despite the challenges, Anna remained steadfast in her decision. Emma wasn't just a contract or an obligation, she was family. And family, Anna believed, was worth fighting for. As Emma's first birthday approached, James and Anna decided to celebrate with a small gathering at James's estate. The day was bright and warm, the kind of perfect weather that seemed tailor-made for such an occasion. Close friends and a few trusted colleagues filled the backyard, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of music playing in the background. James watched as Emma toddled around on wobbly legs, her face lighting up every time someone clapped or cheered her on. She was growing so fast, and every day brought something new. A word, a gesture, a glimpse of the person she was becoming. Anna stood nearby, chatting with one of James's assistants, but her attention was never far from Emma. When the little girl stumbled and fell, Anna was there in an instant, scooping her up with a smile and a reassuring hug. "She's fearless," James said, approaching with a glass of champagne in hand. Anna grinned, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "She gets that from you." James chuckled, his gaze softening as he looked at his daughter. "I don't know about that. She's got a lot of you in her too." The comment hung in the air, unspoken truths weaving between the words. They both knew that Emma was the best parts of both of them, a testament to the unlikely partnership that had brought her into the world. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, James and Anna found themselves alone in the backyard. Emma had fallen asleep in her stroller, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. "It's been quite a year," James said, his voice quiet. Anna nodded, her gaze fixed on Emma. "It has. But I think we've done all right." James smiled, his expression thoughtful. "Better than all right." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through settling over them. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. "Thank you, Anna," James said finally, his voice soft. "For everything." Anna looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, James. For letting this be more than just a contract." And so, as the stars began to light the evening sky, James and Anna sat together, watching over the little girl who had changed both their lives. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was a life they had built together. One filled with challenges, growth, and most importantly, love. The days after Emma's first birthday were filled with a mix of joy and uncertainty. James found himself reflecting more often, not just on the milestones Emma was reaching but on what the future held for all three of them. His carefully planned life, once so predictable and efficient, now felt like a delicate balancing act. One afternoon, as James sat in his office, a knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Anna. She rarely came to the office unless they had a planned meeting, so her unexpected presence caught him off guard. "Anna," he said, standing as she entered. "Is everything all right?" She offered a small smile but didn't sit. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." James gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head, her expression serious. "I won't take up much of your time," she said. "I've been thinking about the future, Emma's future, and I feel like we need to have a conversation about what comes next." James's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? She's just a baby. Isn't it a bit early to be worrying about the future?" Anna smiled faintly, but her tone was firm. "It's never too early. Right now, everything works because she's young and her needs are simple. But as she grows, things are going to get more complicated. We need to be prepared." James leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What exactly are you proposing?" Anna hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. "I think we need to reevaluate our roles. Up until now, I've been involved in Emma's life, but only in a limited capacity. As she gets older, she's going to ask questions about who I am, about our arrangement, and we need to be ready to answer them." James frowned. "Are you saying you want a bigger role in her life?" Anna met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Not necessarily. I'm saying we need to figure out what's best for her, and that might mean redefining how we approach this." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This sounds like the start of a negotiation." Anna smiled faintly. "It's not about negotiating, James. It's about doing what's right for Emma." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, James didn't respond. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain, but Anna had a way of cutting through his defenses, forcing him to confront things he would rather avoid. "All right," he said finally. "Let's talk about it." Over the next few weeks, they began to reassess their arrangement. They met regularly, discussing everything from parenting styles to long-term plans for Emma's education. It was a challenging process, filled with disagreements and compromises, but it also brought them closer together. One evening, during one of their meetings at James's penthouse, Anna brought up a particularly sensitive topic. "Have you thought about introducing Emma to your family?" she asked, her tone careful. James stiffened, his jaw tightening. "My family isn't exactly involved in my life." Anna tilted her head, studying him. "Why not?" James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's complicated." Anna didn't press him, but her silence spoke volumes. James sighed, leaning back in his chair. "My parents and I don't see eye to eye," he admitted. "They've always had certain expectations for me, and I've never been able to meet them. I haven't spoken to them in years." Anna nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think that's fair to Emma?" James frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Anna said gently, "that she deserves to know where she comes from. Family isn't always perfect, but it's still important." James sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't know my parents. They're difficult." Anna smiled faintly. "Most parents are. But maybe it's worth trying." James didn't respond immediately, but her words stayed with him long after she left. A few weeks later, James made the decision to reach out to his parents. It was a difficult choice, one that filled him with equal parts dread and hope. He hadn't spoken to them in nearly 5 years, and he wasn't sure how they would react. When his mother answered the phone, her voice was cautious but curious. "James? Is that you?" "Yes, Mom," he said, his tone strained. "It's me." There was a long pause before she responded. "It's been a while." "It has," James admitted. "I wanted to talk to you about something, someone actually." "Someone?" his mother repeated, her curiosity evident. "My daughter," James said, the words feeling foreign yet strangely right. "Her name is Emma." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When his mother finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I didn't even know you had a child." "There's a lot you don't know," James said softly. "But I want to change that. I want you to meet her." His mother hesitated, but when she finally agreed, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was a small step, but it was a start. The reunion was awkward at first. James's parents, dressed impeccably as always, arrived at his penthouse with guarded expressions. His mother's gaze softened the moment she saw Emma, who was toddling across the living room floor, clutching a stuffed animal. His father, ever the stoic figure, maintained his composure but couldn't hide the flicker of emotion in his eyes. "She's beautiful," James's mother said, her voice trembling slightly. "She has your eyes." James smiled faintly, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. "She's amazing." As the afternoon wore on, the tension began to ease. Emma, with her infectious laughter and boundless energy, had a way of bringing people together. By the time his parents left, James felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. When Anna asked him about the reunion later, he smiled. "It went better than I expected." Anna nodded, her expression warm. "I'm glad. Family can be messy, but it's worth it." James couldn't help but agree. As Emma grew, the challenges continued to evolve. She was a bright, curious child, always asking questions and exploring the world around her. James and Anna worked hard to provide her with a stable, loving environment, but there were moments when the weight of their arrangement became evident. One evening, as James was tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft. "Why does Anna always call you James?" James froze, caught off guard by the question. "Well," he began carefully, "that's her name for me. Just like you call me Daddy." Emma frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer. "But why doesn't she live with us?" James hesitated, his mind racing for the right words. "Because Anna has her own home. But she loves you very much, and she's always here for you." Emma seemed to accept this, but James knew it was only a matter of time before the questions became more complicated. He and Anna would need to be ready. As the years went by, James and Anna navigated the challenges of co-parenting with a mix of determination and grace. They faced criticism, judgment, and their own insecurities, but their shared commitment to Emma never wavered. Through it all, Emma flourished. She grew into a kind, thoughtful, and curious young girl, her laughter a constant source of light in their lives. She was a reminder of what they had built together, and of the strength it took to defy expectations. And as James watched her grow, he realized something profound. His legacy wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the love and effort he put into raising his daughter. It was about the bond he had formed with Anna, a bond that had started as a business arrangement but had grown into something far more meaningful. One evening, as he stood in the backyard watching Emma chase fireflies, Anna joined him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke. "You've done a good job, James," she said softly. He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We've done a good job." Anna smiled, her gaze fixed on Emma. "She's going to do amazing things." James nodded, his heart full. "She already has." And in that moment, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because family, he had learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up every single day for the people you love.